So I have to be honest and say that I felt like this was kind of a weak season finale for season 2 of Doom Patrol. The episode called Wax Patrol. I felt like it was surprisingly inconclusive and subdued. Now, it had its moments, which I'll discuss in just a second, but for the most part, I was kind of surprised at how anticlimactic this felt. But before I get into my specific thoughts with spoilers, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing as I do upcoming reviews of shows and movies and whatever I feel like. And if you'd give me a like or a dislike, whatever you feel like, I would totally appreciate that. So, getting into my specific thoughts on Wax Patrol with spoilers. As I said, I found this surprisingly unsatisfying as a season finale, and I kind of suspect that it has to do with the fact that there was a missing episode this season. I was reading an interview with Abigail Shapiro, who plays Dorothy, and she brought up the fact that because of the pandemic, there was one episode that they didn't get this season, and they were very unclear where that episode was supposed to be. They were just saying there was another episode, but assuming that they shot an episode taking place after this, that would make a lot of sense because this episode did not feel like a season finale at all. There were a lot of elements of it that were good elements. Like, I thought that it was a dramatically interesting episode and one of the better episodes this season from many perspectives, but I felt as a season finale it didn't quite live up to my expectations for a number of reasons. One, they were fighting their own imaginary friends this episode, as these characters, all of them had to face the people that they had as an imaginary friends. But I didn't like this for a number of reasons. One, I felt like it was too on the nose. I think that in a well-written story, the character will have a concrete goal that reflects their internal struggle, and how they achieve or do not achieve that external goal is what makes the story interesting. But the problem here is that the goals have been too internalized, and I felt like this entire episode was problematic in that sense, because I think that the scenes with the imaginary friends were intended to show the characters' lack of growth, how they're still being held back in their progression as characters, but it was all so abstract. Like, it was very unclear what the characters could have done to not be defeated by their imaginary friends. It was very unclear how they could have defeated these imaginary friends. What would they have done differently? Larry, for instance, just turns and looks at at Kipling and gets waxed. So what were the characters supposed to do to win? There has to be like an actual struggle. Instead, what we got was a bunch of scenes where the characters confront their imaginary friends and then get waxed. But there wasn't really any struggle per se. Cyborg fought with his imaginary friend, which I thought there was an interesting layer of meaning in the fact that his imaginary friend was Dr. Cowboy, but who is very obviously played by the actor who plays his father. And the line where Dr. Cowboy says that I'm your imaginary friend, I'm not here to criticize you, I'm just here to pat you on the back and say yeehaw. I felt like that was a compelling moment because essentially I think it was showing what Cyborg thinks he wants his father to do and contrasting that with what it would be like if that was what his father was actually like, and showing why we have parents that challenge us. That was how I interpreted that scene. If you have a different interpretation, let me know. So I thought that was interesting. But again, what was Cyborg supposed to do in this scene to not get waxed? It was very unclear. He started out shooting his imaginary friend with his, arm cannon. So, what was he supposed to do to not get waxed? He confronted the imaginary friend, and there was just apparently no way he could defeat it. Same with Jane. I mean, obviously, I thought that there was some interesting commentary in how her imaginary friend is kind of this idealized combination of different body parts, clearly look like magazine cutout, and that's an interesting commentary on the body image issues that she's probably struggling with, and how she has this idealized view of what she should be like. And obviously, as she's dancing with this imaginary friend, she's coming to realize her lack of growth, how she's still paralyzed and still seeking a role to play because she's unsure how to just be herself. So that was, these are good, compelling narrative moments internally, but the external aspects I felt like were lacking. And of course we had Robotman, Cliff, confronting his imaginary friend, which was Jesus, which this was, I'm going to just go ahead and say this was blasphemous. It was very funny, but blasphemous. And it was basically just an excuse to have Jesus swear a ton and have Cliff repeatedly using Jesus' name in vain in front of Jesus. So those were the big gags there. There wasn't really any way for Cliff to win this fight. It was just an excuse for a bunch of funny gags. But it was interesting this episode how we had Cliff bailing on his daughter's wedding to come and try to save the world. And I can't believe the way he left things with his daughter on that phone call. I can't believe he didn't communicate more clearly what's going on. Like, I have to go. This is an emergency. I would never miss your wedding otherwise. Communication skills, Cliff, got to work on them. But it was interesting how he came to this realization about his relationship with his own father while in the confrontation with Jesus. So again, good internal aspects. External aspects were somewhat lacking. It was funny. I will give it that. So that was probably the funniest of probably the best of the imaginary friend battles was the one between Cliff and Jesus, because at least it was pretty funny, which there wasn't a lot of humor in this episode otherwise. Surprisingly Jane-focused episode, or I should say Miranda, since it was apparently Miranda who was involved in this bad relationship with this boyfriend who reminded me a lot of Milo Ventimiglia from This Is Us, younger Milo. And it was funny because I could see a lot of girls getting taken in by a guy like this, but I could not believe the line that he used to come on to Miranda at the beginning of the episode. What a cheesy bit of dialogue, and I assume it was intended to be taken that way. Either that or the writers are really hacks, but it was like something straight out of Showgirls. It was so bad. Comparing her to a cat, that line, it was just ugh. But obviously we got to see this great dynamic unfolding between Miranda, where eventually it seemed as though Jane took over and extricated herself from this orgy. But my big question with this is Jane's speech seemed really, really critical of anyone who participates in this kind of behavior, which I personally would never participate in that type of behavior. I personally am not condoning it, but I feel like a lot of people will be offended by this speech because it implies that anyone who takes part in this kind of behavior is messed up and is either exploiting women or is allowing themselves to be exploited by men, which I don't know that I think that is true. But let me know what you think in the comments. I just thought that was a very, very strong way to go at that. And again, I think it was good that she had this realization about how she was allowing herself to be manipulated, but it seemed odd to me that I guess she just had this realization when her father appeared to her during this sequence when she was having sex with this man, that she was allowing herself to be exploited again, this time willingly. She probably didn't have a choice last time, and that was kind of what instigated this speech on her part. I'm sure a lot of people probably skipped ahead to this scene because they saw the trailer for this episode and thought, oh, I want to see that. And Diane Guerrero was just downright gorgeous this episode. I felt like she just had a very sweet and innocent beauty that I feel like she's a very attractive actress all the time, but this episode in particular, I was just thinking, wow, she looks really nice. Probably because she's acting different in the Miranda role than she did in the Jane role, but I thought that was interesting. But I'm sure a lot of people saw the teaser for this episode, saw, oh, there's going to be some fleshy moments with Diane Guerrero, and fast forwarded to this sequence. But it was a typical TV show scene where everyone around them participating in the orgy is naked except for the actress, who clearly has a no nudity clause in her contract. So kudos for her, but I bet there's a lot of disappointed fans out there. But I feel that this was a very confusingly handled episode from this storyline, because I couldn't tell who was controlling the body at any given moment, because they kept showing Jane in the well, and then cutting to the person at the orgy, and that made me assume that it was Jane in control, and that this was like a fantasy that was going on in her head while she's inside the well. So I was super confused the whole time as they did this, and eventually it became clear that it was Miranda. And I'm really confused what the point of Miranda is, because she doesn't really seem like she has a coherent philosophy. She's supposed to keep them safe, as the other personality, the chairwoman, says to her in an accusatory fashion, but she doesn't really seem to have a coherent plan or a coherent credo. So I was really confused as how she's distinctive from Jane, and I've been confused on that point. And apparently she's not actually Miranda, because Jane, while in the well, discovered that Miranda has not come out of the well, recovered, that she's still down there. But who this person is, I don't know, and this again leads me to conclude that maybe there was supposed to be another episode, because I feel like they wouldn't have left it this inconclusive. I feel like they would have at least showed who this new threat was. The thing that stood out this episode the most was the ending, which I feel like might have been a good ending cliffhanger for a season, but I tend to think there was probably intended to be one more episode after this. But I can't say with any degree of certainty, so this is just speculation on my part. But the scene between Niles and Dorothy, where Dorothy's mother shows up and, says, Niles, you got to stop keeping her from becoming the woman she's meant to be. She can face the Candlemaker, and where Dorothy has her own weapon and goes to fight the Candlemaker. I thought this was a strong scene, one of the strongest moments in the episode. And that smile on Dorothy's face as she looks back at Niles and then turns to face the Candlemaker. The acting was so good, and the music that was playing over this scene, I was very, very pumped. And Timothy Dalton's acting as he watches Dorothy going to face the Candlemaker, this was really good stuff, and it left the episode on a very, very strong note that almost made up for the fact that I felt like the episode overall was very subdued and anticlimactic. Not conclusive at all, but a very, very good cliffhanger as the Candlemaker grabs Dorothy and pulls her into the fire. My jaw was like 6 inches off my face when that happened. So those are my thoughts, but let me know what you thought down in the comments. If you're interested in seeing more reviews on this channel, please consider subscribing. And as always, you can watch more videos right now.